evolutionary psychology, as it's now called, sociobiology. It used to be teaches us about the nature of humans. But the problem is it doesn't teach us anything much at all.
Evolutionary psychology is the very simple, undebatable premise that our brain, our mind, does not come out of magic. It comes out of the exact same evolutionary forces that explain all of life.
演化心理学这门学科是什么？为什么这门学科这么有争议，让许多人真的面红耳赤？在我们开始了解演化心理学之前，我们先来看一下我们是活在什么样的世界，是如何活在一个连基本认知都被挑战的时代里。我们可以从西方这几年来一个很有名的问题问起。
What is a woman?
What is a woman?
I'm going to need you to explain what a woman is without reference to the word woman.
什么是女人？如果你跟我一样觉得为什么要问这么基本的问题，就像你问我说什么是父亲，什么是母亲，什么是男人，什么是男孩，什么是女孩，这种问题有什么好问的呢？然而在西方，这样的问题竟然是很多人无法回答出来的，甚至还有人做了个纪录片叫做 What is the Woman 来告诉你西方人是如何回答这个问题的。也许你会认为这只是个少数的现象，是被刻意放大夸张的效果。然而在2年前，美国一位被提名为最高法院的大法官 Ketanji Brown Jackson， 他在国会听证会上面也被国会议员问了相同的问题。
Okay. Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So
I'm
you
not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me.
在一个拥有国家最顶级的高度，一个这么重要的场合里面，一个可以决定他是否可以成为美国最高法院的大法官的情境里，结果他也无法回答。所以说 What is the woman 这样的问题在西方不是少数个案而已，已经到了系统性的等级了。所以说演化心理学的崛起跟这一切有什么相关呢？为什么它会被视为眼中钉呢？因为当你用基本常识来回答一些基本认知问题时，你可以被攻击说是思想落后、没有受教，也没有世界观。当你用宗教的角度来回答这件事情时，你可以被说成是迷信的宗教狂热分子。当你是用社会文化的脉络来解释这件事情时，你会被说这是万恶父权带来的已读思想。然而，如果你是用个真正学术学科的角度、客观的数据来解释这件事情的时候，那么这些人还能拿什么来指控你呢？演化心理学这门学科在当代就是这样的一个存在。然而，你以为这些极左就会打退堂鼓了吗？那么你就太天真了。最近国外一个拥有约50万订阅的 YouTuber Mooncat 发布了一个长达3个多小时的影片，标题叫做 I Debunked Evolutionary Psychology。我破解了演化心理学，说演化心理学是一个伪科学、烂科学、谚语科学。而这部影片的流量已经达到了100万以上，附和的留言也源源不绝。所以说这场战争早已经蔓延到学术领域了。演化心理学是个当代被严重低估的学科，但是也慢慢开始受到更多人的关注，各种书籍、podcast 都开始讨论这门学问。而极左民注意到了这个现象，所以必须要在它成气候之前把头给砍了，斩草除根。在今天这个影片，我不是单单要跟你聊 What is the woman 这个议题而已。当然，如果你有兴趣的话，你可以看我过去做的影片。在这个影片，我将告诉你演化心理学是如何遭受到攻击。Mooncat 这3个小时的影片到底讲的是什么，以及演化心理学家是如何回应这些攻击以及指控，以及最重要的，我们可以从这次的事件真正去了解演化心理学到底是什么，以及为什么它在我们自我提升的旅程上扮演很重要的角色。
Evolutionary psychology is the perfect tool for this. Social hierarchies exist, but it's okay because your rung on the societal ladder was determined by your genes. There's nothing you can do about it, so accept it.
Can anyone find for me? I will give you $500,000 if you can find anything for me where any evolutionary psychologist said, this is the way the world is, but it's okay because it was determined by your genes.
其实演化心理学被批评的声音从上个世纪70年代就开始了。当时的争议是聚焦在社会生物学，主要的争议是在于人类的行为是否可以受到演化和基因来解释。所以演化心理学这门学问的基本世界观是什么？到底在研究什么？我们都了解达尔文的进化理论，所谓的物竞天择，适者生存。 自然界的各种生物会为了适应环境，有些后来会开始有所谓的遗传变异，把有利于生存的生物特征遗传给后代。物种是通过自然选择逐渐改变的，而演化心理学也是基于这样的假设。差别在于演化心理学认为人类不只是身体会受到环境适应的影响，诸如我们的脑袋、我们的心理状态、我们的情绪，其实都是环境适应演化出来的结果。那么就让我们来看看 Mooncake 这整整3个小时的影片，到底他是怎么声称破解演化心理学的。
Some professors just love the spotlight. Meet Jeffrey Miller. He'll appear in your documentary leaning up against his F-150, exhibiting his accumulated resources for the ladies. His wife even wore them in her hair on their wedding day. Aww. They're in a polyamorous relationship because they basically means that humans actually didn't evolve to be monogamous. Jeffrey and Diana seem to be doing it because they want to accelerate human evolution by allowing men like Jeffrey with his prime genetics to impregnate multiple women. They are the literal embodiment of, hey, my wife and I saw you from across the bar and we really dig your vibe. Can we buy you a drink? Would you like to become a data point in our study on the effects of polyamory within a socioeconomic context?
Jeffrey Miller 是一位演化心理学家，他在90年代就已经发表过许多演化心理学的相关研究，出过一本书叫做《The Mating Mind》。提出了大脑如何作为性选择的结果而进化。他的伴侣 Diana Freshman 也是一位演化心理学家，他们的关系比较特别，是处于所谓的开放关系。然而 Mooncake 针对 Jeffrey Miller 不是针对他的研究而批评，而是以批评他的私生活为主，甚至拿他的婚礼照当作是羞辱的材料。这让我觉得，一部声称我破解了演化心理学的影片，开头却是针对学者的私生活做出批评跟羞辱。这样的起手式，我已经可以感受到他想要采取什么样的策略了。而这个策略绝对不是什么正兵模式。
You can credit the founding and legitimization of the entire field of evolutionary psychology to John Tooby and his wife Leda Cosmides. John Tooby passed away last year, passing on the baton to Dr. David Buss, someone I touched on quickly in my Manosphere video. He has written multiple books about what he contends are the ingrained differences between the male and female mind, offering the supposed evolutionary framework backing up every unhinged r/red pill post in existence, something which without fail gets him invited to regular appearances on the 3-hour broadcast Circle Jerk.
什么是 Manosphere？ 你可以把它想成是一群讨论男性议题的族群，诸如 PUA、男权运动、红药丸、黑药丸、MGTOW 等等，这些都是所谓的 Manosphere 的族群。我完全可以理解有些偏激的 Manosphere 频道，他们误用了演化心理学的研究的成果，并不是真正站在学术的高度来使用演化心理学的研究，这也造成了很多演化心理学家的困扰。也因为如此，演化心理学家 David Buss 在他的著作《When Men Behave Badly》，他在书中的开头就有说明，他反对有许多 Manosphere 误用他的研究成果。然而 Mooncake 要不是没看过 David Buss 这本书，要不然就是刻意无视书上有强调的这件事情。在他还没开始批评演化心理学之前，就直接先把 David Buss 打成跟 Manosphere 是同一挂的人物。
One more time. Not only is what she's saying not true, literally, we have Alex Datesike, who is going around explaining that there's a lot of people in red pill space who disagree with certain concepts in evolutionary psychology. And one more time, she's using hyperbole. Every unhinged red pill idea. So she's done the same thing. Instead of reading Dr. Buss's books, which I guarantee you she hasn't, what she stated and said is that Dr. Buss is deliberately and nefariously providing fuel for some of these conspiratorial ideas and putting fuel on the fire with regards to hating women. Which, if you've talked to Dr. Buss or listened to any of his briefings, at any of his TED Talks or whatever, or any of his interviews, it isn't true, nor is it in his books. And in fact, if anyone is critical of the Manosphere in his books, who is it, Rolo? It's Dr. fucking Buss.
除此之外 ，Mooncake 尝试想把演化心理学家的研究过程用一种宅男羞辱的方式来暗喻他们就是一群研究学术的怪咖。
All Evo psychers think that the brain is entirely molded by the Pleistocene, either that or Plasticine. I can't remember which. Fuck. But it's not surprising when you read some of their papers and are exposed to the type of language that they use to describe human nature. It's a bit like looking into Sam Bankman-Fried's mind, which seems to be so cooked by effective altruism to the point that he's unable to see anything outside of the myopic perspective of probabilities and equations. Darwinian evolution provides an explanation for cooperative behavior in which, where W is probability and C is cooperate and D is defect, W exceeds C over B.
我们先不论许多演化心理学家都有自己的家庭，或者是有自己丰富的约会生活，但是针对一门学科的研究，当认真研究下去的时候，自然会出现一些模型、数据和理论等等，这是科学研究的本质，让我们可以更加理解这个世界是如何运作的。人类各种学科领域，医学、工程、化学、物理，哪个不是专于许多一般人无法理解的知识原理，以及生出一堆专有名词？
It's like this sort of ostensibly dispassionate and algorithmic approach to the well-being of humankind.
Hold on. Listen. This is again very confusing to a lot of people, and maybe she just genuinely doesn't understand this. Scientific pursuits are supposed to be dispassionate. There's nothing like she makes fun of people for being nerdy, but like someone has to do this work. Someone has to be dispassionate and algorithmic because the rest of us are emotional. We don't have to pay people to be emotional. Everyone can just be we don't have to pay people to like the Super Bowl or Dancing with the Stars. They just do it anyway. We have to pay people and we have to fund individuals and motivate individuals to be dispassionate and algorithmic. Otherwise, we never come up with formulas for putting ships into space, building skyscrapers, and coming up with ways of curing diseases.
可想而知 ，Mooncat 的目的就是先为这些演化心理学家贴上怪咖的标签，来为他接下来攻击演化心理学来做铺路。好的，这些烂招的使用就先讲到这个地方。其实整个3个小时里面，他真正在批评演化心理学的部分并不多。那么接下来我们就来看看他是如何去批评演化心理学的。
People seeing culture moving away from a supposed ideal will use varied mechanisms to stop that change. First, they might use the law to restrict the freedom of people moving away from this sort of norm. But once this technique has been vanquished by the progressives, conservatives may turn to more psychological manipulation, basically gaslighting the public into believing things have always been this way for a reason. And the final resort of this psychological manipulation is the misleading use of science. Evolutionary psychology is the perfect tool for this. Social hierarchies exist, but it's okay because your rung on the societal ladder was determined by your genes. There's nothing you can do about it, so accept it.
No， 谁说演化心理学是接受宿命论的，以及阻止人类进步的？这是去看什么奇怪的频道来签多套演化心理学的。如果按照这个逻辑，我们都了解原始人可能他们觅食困难，所以经常会在洞穴里面休息。于是人类我们就会研发出这一种不想要突破舒适圈的个性。所以这样我们就推导出一个结论说，人生最棒的哲学就是躺平吗？演化心理学提出这些现象解释，只是为了让我们更加了解自己的优缺点。因为理解我们本身有惰性存在，所以可以让我们更有觉知的面对它，让我们迈向自己想要的生活。演化心理学不代表放弃人类进步，也不代表是基因决定论。对于演化心理学常见的误解，就是会陷入所谓的 the naturalistic fallacy， 所谓的自然主义谬误。这个谬误在于认为，只要是大自然的事物，那么就必然是好的。在达尔文的世界观里面，并没有认为只要是大自然的事物就是良善的，这只是代表他通过了大自然的选择与适应，持续存在在这个世界上面。许多大自然血腥丑陋的地方，人心有暴力本质的地方，这些在道德上面都不是良善的。反之，许多医学以及人类发展出来的科技与文化，这些都不是自然的，但是却有道德良善的本意在里面。总结来说，许多批评演化心理学的人，要么是不知道，要么就是刻意把实然和因然捆绑在一起，或者应该说，他们会把诊断和处方捆绑在一起。演化心理学并不是基因决定论，也并不是告诉你人生应该怎么活的人生哲学，它是去观察这个世界的现象，并且用演化心理学的理论来提出假设，并且最后去实证研究，看看这样的假设是否存在的一门学问。接下来一个常见的批评就是说，演化心理学根本就不可证伪。首先，我们来了解一下什么是不可证伪。简单来说，就是你无法透过观察或者实验来测试 来验证一件事情到底是正确的还是错误的。常被人用来举的例子就是上帝是否存在这个命题，因为你无法设计出一个实验来证明上帝是存在着，但是你也无法证明出上帝是不存在的，所以许多人认为上帝是否存在这个命题是不可证伪的。好的，那么这些指控演化心理学是不可证伪的论述到底是什么？他们会说，演化心理学很多的理论都是基于远古时代环境影响的适应，但是你又没有时光机可以回到远古时代，所以你又怎么能确定这些环境是如同你所说的呢？
Evolutionary psychology bases its assumptions on the theory that our base traits were established in what is called the EEA, Environment of Evolutionary Adaptedness, the Pleistocene savanna, which conveniently happened too long ago for any of us to really know what went on. No one was on their phones, everyone was living in the moment. This is where humans first appeared a few million years ago. Once they'd started living in caves and drew this AI-generated lion orgy on the wall, they all had a meeting and agreed that they'd peaked and they should stop evolving there and then, so that future evolutionary psychologists could call this the environment of evolutionary adaptedness to make their jobs a lot easier to do.
Okay, so this is what she gets wrong. So I can maybe she just genuinely doesn't understand this. The EAA that she's describing is when humans became the apex predator and started using fire in the wheel. It's not when evolution stopped. What happened at the point of the EAA is we started having less selection pressure against humans. It doesn't mean we were perfect. You have a point to where there's massive evolutionary pressure for you to not get hunted by the lion, for you to not have food scarcity, for you to be able to find shelter, and for you to live in a tribe, a very structured hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and anything outside of these proclivities would cause you to die, so only a select group of people survive. Once we got to the point where we're the apex predator, where we can throw objects overhand, we can use fire to cook, we have all these other tools that make us the apex, most dangerous animal on the planet. At that point, now, because the selection pressure has left, all the different derivatives and possibilities of human evolution start to expand. It doesn't mean this was perfect. It meant this is when the selection pressure stopped.
Mooncat seems to suggest that we can't derive any hypotheses about the way the human mind works that are based on our ancestral environment because she thinks we have no idea what that was like. Number one, that's just not true. We have plenty of evidence of what our ancestral environment might have looked like, including current hunter-gatherer societies and small-scale societies that kind of seem similar to our ancestral way of life. If the logic is that the past can't explain the present, we can never use the past to understand what our mind, the selection pressures that our mind evolved in response to, then we might as well throw out all of cosmology. So I don't think we expect a Mooncat debunks the Big Bang Theory, even though cosmological evidence is based on millions of years into the past. Predictions about the way the cosmos work based on that. So yeah, we have a good reason to think that we know somewhat what the environment of evolutionary adaptedness was like.
另外，如果我们就看演化心理学到底在做什么样的研究，你会发现他们的研究完全都是可以证伪的。比如说，当代的演化心理学家 Get Sad， 他就做过个研究，他去研究男人对于女人身材比例的偏好到底是多少。
I had a prediction. This is a paper published in 2008 where I said, well, let me see if the hourglass figure of 0.68 to 0.72, which is the range that men have a sort of near universal preference for the hourglass figure, let me see if I can demonstrate that it is a ubiquitous preference across many societies. So there's a very clear hypothesis that's very easily falsifiable. If the preference comes in at 0.68 to 0.72, this is evidence for the hypothesis. If it comes out outside those ranges, it falsifies the hypothesis. There's nothing unfalsifiable about that hypothesis. So I had a research assistant code female escorts advertising their sexual services across, if I remember correctly, 48 very, very different countries. And across all countries, the waist-to-hip ratio that these female escorts advertised online was 0.772. Therefore, there was evidence for the posited hypothesis. Had the data come back and it was 0.78, had the data come back and it was 0.63, then that hypothesis would have been, drumroll, falsified.
包含另外一个被演化心理学家证伪的命题，就在于研究男人是不是普遍性的都偏好处女，是不是不分国籍、不分文化都是有这样同样的偏好。那过去很多人都以为，可能是这样， 但最后被当代的演化心理学家 David Budge 做出研究，发现这件事情是错误的。研究结果说明，在亚洲的国家，确实男人会有普遍性的偏好处女，但是在北欧的国家，比如说瑞典，有些男性其实并不喜欢处女。有些认为说，如果有些女生已经到20多岁还是处女的话，那么可能她有一些人格特质或一些特征是不被喜欢的。所以演化心理学的研究完完全全是可以被证伪的。演化心理学还有个很常见的批评，就是认为演化心理学很多的理论根本就是异想天开的乱编故事。
The most common criticism of the field is that it's rife with just so stories, which essentially means an untestable explanation for a theory. And these motherfuckers will come up with anything. Like they observe gorilla breasts as being flat, but human women breasts are rounded. So this must be, they say, for the pleasure and sexual selection of men to show that they're fertile. Whether you first thought up the hypothesis because of what you think you know about human behavior in the Pleistocene, or whether you thought up your hypothesis because of something you noticed within modern culture, the very definition of a just so story is something that's untestable. But what's the rebuttal of this?
It is certain that our ancestors, like other old world primates, nursed, had two sexes, chose mates, had color vision calibrated to the spectral properties of sunlight, lived in a biotic environment with predatory cats, venomous snakes and spiders, were predated on, bled when wounded, were incapacitated from injuries, were vulnerable to a large variety of parasites and pathogens, and had deleterious recessives rendering them subject to inbreeding depression if they mated with siblings.
I mean, this is true, but it's also true of most mammals. It's simply not enough knowledge for us to make the kinds of connections evolutionary psychology makes between its evolutionary predictions and the data it finds.
Wait, hold on. How is it not? Like, do you guys remember what she said before? How it was a step up to say that our bodies and our minds evolved at the same rate? What did she just do right there? She admitted that there's clearly signs where evolution shaped adapted human beings. So for instance, your eyeballs can see light in a visible spectrum that's visible on the surface of the earth, right? Which makes sense. The sunlight is usually between 3800 Kelvin and 5600 Kelvin, okay? That's true. The idea we have an aversion to snakes or the other things that, if we go back through all the things that he talked about here, the whole concept of natural selection does not help her argument. And so what she has to do now, like I said before, she has to separate evolutionary biology from evolutionary psychology because she can't argue with evolutionary biology. She can't. She's not going to go against Darwin. Her friends, her woke liberal friends, are not going to support her going against Darwin, but they will support her going against Buss. And so that's what's happening here, is she's using this terminology to separate those two fields of practice.
The just so story is when the hypothesis connects the data gathered to something about early humankind that we don't know and will never know, such as how they chose their mates based on behavioral traits or how they actively avoided pathogens, if they even did, because it might just have been pure luck.
No one's saying it isn't pure luck. Like, there probably were humans that didn't avoid pathogens. Do you know what happened to them? They died. They're dead now. That's called selection pressure. Selection pressure sometimes is fucking random. It's not a cognitive thing sometimes.
And the very nature of evolutionary psychology renders all hypotheses essentially untestable, because your hypotheses will include the contention that we evolved the trait that we're testing. That bit is the just so story because you literally can't prove it.
The theories espoused in Origin of Species stand tall today, not because we don't have the capacity to falsify whatever Darwin said in 1859. Believe me, very motivated people have tried to falsify his theories and failed precisely because they are veridical. The reason why people think it's unfalsifiable, so now let me give you the cognitive explanation. Evolution has happened in the past, and therefore people think, well, if you use some theoretical explanation to generate a hypothesis, but that theoretical explanation occurred in a distal past, well, then you're engaging in post hoc theorizing. It is astonishing how dumb that is. When you study the origin of the universe, as do astrophysicists, what do you think you're doing? You conduct an observational study. If the data comes out as A, it supports your prediction that the universe is expanding. If the data comes out as not A, it supports the alternative prediction that the universe is contracting. Nobody would say that this is a post hoc, speculative, unfalsifiable hypothesis. What do geologists do? They study rocks that are 400 million years old. Are they engaging in post hoc, unfalsifiable BS? So again, let me repeat. Those who claim that evolutionary predictions are unfalsifiable, let me translate what they're saying. I'm a moron who doesn't understand evolutionary psychology. I took a women's studies course at Wellesley. I aped that stupidity.
Mooncat 的批评还有个论述，就是认为演化心理学要面对的世界，要研究的东西实在太过复杂了，不可能完全研究到透彻的，所以干脆就别去研究了吧。
When the idea was first proposed for the Human Genome Project, scientists were pretty excited about the prospect of being able to pinpoint specific genes for specific genetic health conditions, and perhaps, eventually, psychological traits. You could think of it like one person's genome being all of the stars in the universe. There's bloody loads of gene variants in it, and some of them are in constellations that happen to appear together, and some of those constellations are meaningless, but some could increase your chances of having a trait. But some traits require entire galaxies of genes to happen to appear together. We've found hundreds of genes with varying probability that they will affect your height, and look at the amount of people they needed to even get that far.
但是我们都了解这个世界很复杂，宇宙很复杂，脑神经也很复杂，就连摸不到的哲学也很复杂。然而人类文明的美妙，这个世界之所以让人这么雀跃，就是因为这个世界上有无限的未知等着你去挖掘与学习。你永远也不用担心这辈子可以得到所有的真理与真相。然而 Mooncat 为了要批评演化心理学，竟然可以把这样的思维倒转。因为演化心理学要面对的问题是这么的未知又复杂又无限。对我来说，如果你是个极右翼、极度传统的宗教分子，那么我还可以理解。但如果你认为你自称是一个自由派的左派，去说出这样的结论，那你们跟那些宗教分子，跟那些说什么这个世界都是上帝所创造出来的啊，你去读这些莫名其妙的学科就是亵渎上帝啊，那你跟这些人其实没有什么两样吧。
What she's going to express is basically, because of heritability, the complexity of heritability, we don't actually know exactly how heritability works. But then she extrapolates that to then that means that why are we even studying it? And we get back to this whole thing again, because the world is more complicated than we'd like it to be. Let's just give up. Why are we studying this in the first place? Right. Or she'll say, bro, I could have figured that out on my own, not using evolutionary sciences. So why are we studying it? Again, anything but studying evolutionary science. Do not study evolutionary sciences. Whatever we got to do to keep you from doing that.
如果你对演化心理学没有深入的研究的话，那你可能不会发现 Mooncat 在这个影片里面，他会把许多只要挂上心理学这些学科所拥有的问题，全部都归类成是演化心理学的问题。
The Reproducibility Project was started in 2015 to really try and round up some numbers on how many psychology papers were unable to be replicated. They reran 100 papers, and only 36% of the papers returned significant results.
36% of psychology papers. Keep listening.
Another replication project was started in 2018, in which 62% of the papers were able to reproduce.
62% of psychology papers. Keep listening.
There have been pretty prominent cases quite recently of behavioral scientists just literally...
Wait, what type of scientists?
Behavioral science.
Behavioral scientists. So psychology papers and behavioral scientists. By the way, do you guys want to know who the enemy of the evolutionary psychologist is? It's the behavioral psychologists. Okay? They're on two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Selling scientific evidence on the supposed intrinsic nature of human psychology is incredibly lucrative.
Human psychology. Has anybody noticed one thing that she's totally omitted from this reproducibility study? Ready? Evolutionary psychology. The video is titled, I Debunked Evolutionary Psychology. This is one of her key points, but she leaves it to 1 hour and 18 minutes into the video. She talks about non-reproducibility. Now, who here thinks that if Mooncat found a non-reproduced evolutionary psychology study, like the 37 culture study that Dr. Buss did, which was reproduced, who thinks that she would have left it out of her video debunking evolutionary psychology? So now ask yourself a question. Why didn't she include an evolutionary psychology study that wasn't reproduced? Anybody ready? Because she couldn't find one. Evolutionary psychology is not psychology. It's a function of psychology, but it is very, very different from your standard therapist psychiatric psychology. There's no Freudian shit in it. It's not like that. It's not the behavioral stuff. It's not Pavlov's dog.
Yeah.
So this is very different form of psychology.
Mooncake 为了要继续攻击演化心理学，可以是无所不用其极。只要任何挂上心理学这3个字的学科，他都会把这些学科所造成的问题推到演化心理学上面。所以我们就来看看 Mooncake 是怎么把其他心理学系的问题甩锅到演化心理学上面的。首先 ，Mooncake 批评演化心理学有很严重的重现问题。什么是重现问题？基本上就是你在某个时刻发表了一篇论文，说明你发现了一个现象，但是呢，在过了几十年后或者几年之后，你再做一次一样的实验，发现这些现象都不见了。那么这个就是所谓的重现问题。
The Reproducibility Project was started in 2015 to really try and round up some numbers on how many psychology papers were unable to be replicated. They reran 100 papers, and only 36% of the papers returned significant results. Another replication project was started in 2018, in which 62% of the papers were able to reproduce. Academics accumulate prestige by publishing as many papers as possible and racking up as many citations of those papers as possible. Sometimes publication is required for an academic to continue in their career. Success is not measured by accuracy of research. It's all about quantity over quality.
You guys how she's now showing Buss and Jeffrey Miller and Lita Cosmides, but she did not. So she talks about the reproducibility project, and then she shows Buss. But do you notice she didn't say Dr. Buss had one of those papers that wasn't reproduced? Because if Dr. Buss had a paper that wasn't reproduced, that would be the first thing she had brought up in this video.
然而，如果你仔细去看 Mooncake 在影片里面提出有重现问题的心理学论文，很多都不是演化心理学的研究，而是跟演化心理学经常打对台的心理学领域，比如说社会心理学。
So certainly she's going on about replicability and all of that, and she seems to imply that replicability in evolutionary psychology is actually lower than in other things, but here is a list of journals in which we have high rates of replication versus low rates. Personality research, so research on individual differences, like sex differences, that kind of a thing. Evolutionary psychology, they actually kind of have the highest replication rates here, right? The standard social science modeler, the blank slate, it probably has more of a replicability crisis. I mentioned a bunch of things from that were big theories that have all fallen to the replication crisis. At the top of this, one of the most replicable subdomains in psychology is actually personality psychology, which personality psychology, if people don't know that is where you study a lot of sex differences. It overlaps very highly with evolutionary psychology. Like I came into evolutionary psychology from personality psychology. That was my background there.
David Buss was a personality psychologist before an evolutionary psychologist.
Precisely. It overlaps a lot. If you're looking at, a lot of relationship behavior, things like the dark triad, personality differences, all of this is personality psychology. This has a very high replication rate. What has a low replication rate? Social psychology. That's where you're going to find all of your standard social science model stuff. Social psychology. Low replication. That's kind of what she's got going on there. 25% replication rate. So
I eagerly await the Mooncat debunk social psychology video.
在看 Mooncake 这个影片的时候，我一直在等待他什么时候提到 David Buss 在1990年发表的那篇论文，是提到有关男女在长期关系里面择偶偏好的差异，跨37个文化的研究。因为当你说你要破解演化心理学的时候，你很自然的就会想到那篇论文。而看完这3个小时的影片之后，你会发现他刻意回避这篇论文，而这篇论文的内容到底是什么？待会我会跟你解释。什么是 weird？ 这个全名其实叫做 Western Educated, Industrialized, Rich and Democratic， 指的是源自西方国家、受过教育、工业化程度高、富裕与民主的族群。而这些族群的国家占全世界只有12%。 Mooncat 质疑演化心理学研究所用的样本基本上都是来自于 weird。
Academics enter social sciences and psychology fields with a pre-existing bias, whether they admit it or not. The last few decades have provided them with the institutions and funding with which they can carry out research, but most of the time the funding only allows them to carry out studies with at most a few hundred people, and most of the time it appears to be less than 100 Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic samples of university students.
So Mooncat rightfully pointed out that a lot of psychology studies are dependent on weird samples. And Joe Henrich had a very famous paper that found that 96% of psychology participants in the studies come from a weird country. Now, evolutionary psychology is far less egregious on this front. Some of the seminal papers from the 80s and all the way through until the current day, evolutionary psychology papers consist of 30 to 50 cultures, 30 to 50 different countries. That is very unheard of compared to most social psychology.
I went through all of the most recent papers published in a journal, Feminism and Psychology, and I compared them with all of the most recent samples taken from the journal Evolutionary Psychology. And so what do we see here? We see sample sizes in Feminism and Psychology 14, 24, 71, 21, 23, 112, and 18. So the average here, or the median, I guess, is 23, their sample size in this feminist psychology journal. Very small samples are very, very common in research like this that tend to be more qualitative or something like that. They're pretty common in disciplines like neuroscience as well. If you look in evolutionary psychology, on the other hand, here we have a median sample size of 356. So to compare, the average median, or I should say the medium psychology sample from this other paper here, it's only 60.
Yeah.
That's about what you're working with across psychology broadly. Evolutionary psychology actually seems to be using much larger samples than we see in other fields, particularly if you begin to look at like feminist research, qualitative data, then you're looking at like, I interviewed 10 people.
再来 Mooncat 去批评演化心理学所引用的论文还有资料实在太旧。
For instance, here's a paper with David Buss as an author, which was published in 2015. It has a citation from a paper written in 1973. They'll consistently cite studies written 50 years ago which are clearly rife with the overt misogynistic and racist attitudes of their time. The amount of times I've looked up a citation of an evolutionary psychology paper and immediately screamed, why does this look like it was scanned in? I can see the binder holes. I shouldn't be seeing binder holes. Why does this PDF look like it was downloaded from the Titanic? This should be an artifact in a psychology museum, not a citation. Here's a rule you might understand. Don't cite a paper if it's too old for you to consider it sexually attractive.
一开始听到的时候我有点错愕，因为有做过研究的都知道，有很多具有权威性的论文，它之所以会旧，不是因为它是不好的，那是因为它经得起时间的考验，因为很多人想要尝试推翻，他们都没有成功。
I mean, in psychology, we're kind of taught if there's a seminal theoretical contribution, you cite the theoretical first seminal paper. And some of these old papers are replicated, they're very robust, first of all, and they're replicated time and time again. So the mate preferences studies that David Buss did in 1989, first of all, extremely non-weird, 37 different cultures, thousands of participants from all over the world, finding a large degree of universality in mate preferences, recently replicated with an even larger cross-cultural sample by Katie Walter in 2020. Best practice, I think, in my citation is to cite the original and then cite the most up-to-date evidence. But some of these findings, like, for example, the sex differences in desire for sexual variety, they've been replicated so many times that it would be almost impossible to cite them all. You'd have pages upon pages. My supervisor, David Buss, he calls them the most boring replications in all of psychology. We find them, again, by accident when we're looking for other things.
所以接下来我们就来谈谈 David Buss 在1990年的时候发表了这篇很有名的论文是什么。这篇论文横跨了37个不同的文化，跨越了各种不同的种族、政治倾向、宗教信仰等等，花了5年的时间，他去研究男女在长期关系的择偶偏好上面到底是什么。其实男女对于长期择偶的偏好有许多都是相同的。比如说健康、聪明、有责任感、良善、吸引力等等。当只要牵扯到身为人的价值的时候，男女的偏好其实是很类似的。然而，当牵扯到男女生育繁衍本质上的不同时， 这份差异就出现了，而且是具有跨文化的通用性。男性会偏好年轻与貌美的女性，因为这些特质隐含着生育能力；而女性会偏好地位以及经济能力，或者是一些人格特质，让对方未来能够有掌控资源的潜力，诸如勤奋与野心等等。在台湾，我们习惯称之为上进心。你也许认为这谁不知道呢？何必需要演化心理学家来告诉我这个结果呢？然而 David Buss 当初要做这个研究之前，他特别去问了其他相关领域的学者。其他领域的学者，他们都认为男女对于长期关系的偏好，并不具有跨文化、跨国籍的普遍性，也就是很看当地的文化与国情，比如说是不是资本主义或是社会主义，都会有所不同。然而，当时唯独演化心理学的基础理论预测到会有这种跨文化普遍性的不同。好的，那么这些基础理论是什么？我们就来帮大家科普一下演化心理学的基础知识。什么是性择理论？简单来说，人类的某些生理以及心理的特征，会为了想要繁衍后代而进行竞争，而许多演化过程中存留下来的生理与心理特征，就是一种被选择出来的结果。雄性间会彼此竞争，争夺交配权，而雌性则会选择对自己繁衍最有利的雄性特征。比如说孔雀的羽毛、鹿的巨大鹿角的特征，虽然增加了被捕食的风险，但是它们增加了吸引异性的能力。Robert Trevor， 他是一位著名的美国演化生物学家，他在动物以及人类行为的演化理论相关研究很有名。他的许多理论对于演化生物学以及演化心理学产生了深远的结果。他最著名的贡献之一就是所谓的父母投资理论 （Parental Investment Theory）。这一理论是对达尔文的性择理论的重要扩展。所谓的父母投资，就是指父母为了增加其后代的生存与繁衍，所需要投入的时间、精力与资源。因为每个人的时间、精力和资源是有限的，并且因为性别的不同，通常女性会比男性还要投入更多的投资。比如说，女性会怀孕、哺乳与抚养后代方面，通常会需要投资的比男性还要多。因为这样本质上的性别差异，就会造就男女择偶策略上有根本性的不同。女性会选择可以提供更多资源以及有良好基因的雄性，而雄性则会为了获得更多交配的机会而进行雄性竞争。George Christopher Williams 也是一位著名的演化生物学家，他对演化心理学有很重要的贡献，特别是在生殖价值的概念化上面。这一概念是在他1966年的著作《Adaptation and Natural Selection》中提出，用来解释为什么择偶偏好会在某些年龄段。用最白话文来解释，就是一个人从出生到死亡，中间有一段年龄是你拥有最高繁衍后代的年龄，这个预期可以繁衍后代的期望值，就是你未来繁衍后代的潜力。而这个生殖价值的曲线，雄性和雌性会有所不同。以人类来讲，女性的生殖价值在青春期后迅速上升，并在20多岁时达到峰值，之后随着年龄增加而下降。而男性的生殖价值则可以在较长时间内保持相对的稳定。所以，无论是性择理论、父母投资理论以及生殖价值的概念化，这些都是演化心理学的基础理论。而这也是为什么当初 David Buss 在做那份为期5年的研究时，在结果出来之前，其他学科的学者都无法预测出男女对于长期关系的择偶偏好会不同。所以这份研究的成果也证明了演化心理学的基础理论模型有很不错的预测能力。你也许会认为，这会不会只是一次性的研究？这个现象到现在还存在吗？会不会有重现的问题？然而，同样的研究其实在2020年又做了一次，而且这次的研究样本横跨了45个国家，最后发现这样的现象仍然大量的重现。所以这份演化心理学的研究成果指出了很多事情，其中一件事情就是一篇论文如果很旧，不代表它是不好的，很可能是因为它经得起时间的考验。David Buss 1990年的那篇论文就是如此，而且这篇论文的被引用次数已经达到6000次以上了。而6000次到底是多还是少呢？可以给我一点概念，一般的论文平均被引用的次数大概是180次左右，而诺贝尔奖的论文大概是被引用到5万次。所以6000次以上其实是一个很不错、很优秀的论文了。当然，演化心理学并不是完美的学科，它有很多问题必须要被解决。比如说同性恋到底要怎么样在演化心理学上面的环境适应做出解释，这个矛盾叫做同性恋进化悖论。
Yeah, so that is an evolutionary puzzle of there's lots of same-sex sexual behavior throughout the animal kingdom, and a recent paper found that it is adaptive because it increases pro-social behavior among same-sex individuals in that species. So you would think, oh yes, well, humans must have a relic of that too. But what is a puzzle is the exclusive homosexuality. So some humans are exclusively attracted to the same sex, and that does seem to be uniquely human and an evolutionary paradox. But like Charles Darwin, we shouldn't be afraid of these puzzles, we should try and engage with them. And it is difficult to explain some aspects of modern human sexuality, but there are some theories. Some have found good support, some have found less support. One is like the fraternal birth order effect, where the more older brothers you have, the more likely you are to be homosexual. Lots of these theories, but she seemed to suggest that the idea of having multiple theories, she kind of laughed at the idea that, oh, there's 10 evolutionary theories and none of them are any good.
Homosexual people, the gays, you have been dubbed by evolutionary psychologists the Darwinian paradox. There just has to be an explanation for you, and they've racked their brains trying to explain you, and they've come up with some of the most interesting failed hypotheses in EvoPsych to date.
Top 10 failed evolutionary explanations for gay people.
It's like, that's how you you find the truth, is you keep actually trying to find evidence for your supported theory. That's, again, normal science.
Yeah.
这个情形跟当时达尔文在面对孔雀开屏的现象所遇到的困境与矛盾一样。达尔文当时的物竞天择式的生存的理论，在遇到孔雀开屏的时候完全矛盾，因为孔雀开屏是非常消耗成本的，并且很容易被掠食者给发现。就生存演化上，这样的演化结果完全矛盾。然而，当时达尔文并没有因此而放弃，他持续的研究下去，他发现原来演化过程中还有所谓的性择理论，意思是孔雀开屏的演化不是为了生存的优势，而是为了择偶的优势。Castello 说明，也因为当时达尔文没有放弃，所以后来才可以发展出更健全的理论架构。而演化心理学面对同性恋的问题也是一样，不应该就这样放弃了，而是持续追求真实，让演化心理学的理论可以更加健全。事实上，演化心理学不只是跟极左有纷争而已。演化心理学家在Twitter上面也跟很多红药丸的频道主有所争吵，就像是西方红药丸教父 Rollo Tomassi， 他非常不认同演化心理学家这几年忽然推翻自己过去的研究 Dual Mating Strategy。
And I have to back up just a second.
Okay, let me help him back up just a second. No, there's actually quite a bit of research on this. I don't understand why it's Rollo Tomassi, this guy who with just a bachelor's in behavioral psychology, has to point this out. It should be guys like Steve Stewart Williams. It should be guys like Rob Henderson for sure, who should be doing these shows. Not me. You guys should be doing this.
什么是 Dual Mating Strategy？ 可以看我之前的影片，简单解释一下 Dual Mating Strategy， 就是女人对于男人的偏好会随着自己月经周期而有所改变。当在排卵期时，他们会偏向比较高睾固酮、男子气概比较明显的男人。而在低生育期的时候，会偏向比较温柔女性化的男人。这几年演化心理学家又重新做了这个研究，却发现这样的现象已经消失了，或者说这个现象非常不明显。也因为如此，现在很多演化心理学家已经不支持 Dual Mating Strategy 了，而是去支持 Mate Switch Hypothesis。
So it's a risky thing. Why do women do it? One is called the dual mating strategy hypothesis, where women are seeking to get resources and investment from one guy and good genes from another guy. And originally I was endorsed it because the data seemed to support it. But over time I became more and more dubious about this hypothesis and instead have advocated what I call the mate switching hypothesis.
罗罗对这个结果很不满意，他暗指演化心理学界已经被左派给腐化了。认为他们被指示要压下这个研究成果。
Dual mating because it's alpha fucks, beta bucks. Before you're in a relationship, it's is he hot? Do I want to fuck him? Or is he boyfriend material? Or is he one night stand material? Is it cads versus dads? And there is robust research on this from as far back as the late 90s. If you go to Marty Hazelton's work, and suddenly right around 2018, 2015, 2018. That's when all this, we're going to do some meta studies and see if we can disprove this. And it's coming right at the same time where we're looking at the crisis of replicability. And I don't know if you're familiar with the crisis of replicability.
Right.
But it's like all of these very old, very well replicated experiments suddenly don't become replicable anymore in this new environment. And again, some people have said it's because of commercial interests. Some people have said it's because it's the woke, because there are too many women in these fields now. It just depends. But what you can't argue is the fact is that these well replicated studies now are unreplicated. So you're telling me that a guy with the kind of reputation and the kind of background that David Buss has in all of this, from going on like 50 years, suddenly, because these haven't been replicated in the crisis of replicability, now he's going to write a book and say, well, now I've got a new idea.
然而，演化心理学家却觉得 Rollo 莫名其妙。他们不认为 dual mating strategy 有什么大不了的，不过就是女人性偏好的改变而已，不是什么伟大的阴谋有必要被压下来的研究。
What's interesting is like these are not that crucial like to your worldview. Like, does it really matter if women like men a little bit more who are a little bit more facially masculine when they're ovulating? It's weird that that's become kind of a fixture of the manosphere as well, because it's not that important of a finding.
Yeah, which is the morally suspect hypothesis, the mate switching or the dual mating? I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny too, because in the manosphere they're like they want to suppress this because they can't let it get out. That's why it's not replicating, and it's like it's not that controversial. It's not that big of a deal.
They only knew how science works and how we're not that coordinated to run a conspiracy like that for sure.
所以我们可以看到演化心理学家在左右派所处的关系，彼此之间都有纷争，这是个 free for all 的大乱战。演化心理学家跟红药丸大部分时候都会在推特上面吵架，只是这一次 Mooncat 的影片一出来，没想到红药丸开始帮演化心理学家辩护了起来，也算是这次事件很有趣的现象。回到影片的开头，我说我们是处在一个连基本认知都被挑战的世界，是一个连 What is the woman 都没办法回答的世界里。那么 Mooncat 又是怎么去回答 What is the woman 这个问题呢？
You cannot accurately describe a woman without using the term woman, and in the same way, you cannot accurately describe a cat without using the term cat. Somebody might come up to me and say, "Why do you think Brooklyn is a cat?" And I'd say, "Well, he's got pointy ears and whiskers and fur and toe beans, but I've also just described a dog. How do I know that Brooklyn is a cat? How do I know I haven't been feeding a dog for the past 7 years?" Well, my brain is doing thousands of calculations at once to come to a statistical summary of my life experiences of catness and making a decision based on that. Emotions are heavily involved in this process because my brain has to come to a conclusion of his catness. Otherwise, I'd go insane and I'd start throwing balls at him thinking he'll bring them back. Maybe he is just a shit dog, but my emotions are telling me that he's a cat, so I'm gonna go with it.
You know, as I've said and you've said, there's no such thing as my truth, right? There's your opinion and then there's the truth.
Well, call me a wokey woke, Benny boy, but I actually do believe there is no the truth.
Mooncat 不认为有客观的事实，一切都是主观的解释，这是个后现代主义的思维，所以他用这种猫之所以为猫，是因为有过去的经验与脑袋认知它是猫，所以它就是猫。但是对我来说，猫这种东西是有科学客观上的定义的，因为生物学上面同属于猫科才能够繁殖。尽管我看到一只狗，我觉得像猫；尽管我过去的经验让我觉得这只狗就是猫，但是当客观的事实打醒我了，科学与许多科学的方法验证告诉我，我以为这是对我来说是猫的狗，其实就是狗。因为我尊重这个真实，我也尊重一起活在这个真实的其他人。如果我可以因为自己感受的关系就罔过这个真实的存在，那么如果我是个没有力量的人，那么我就被这个真实给毁灭。但如果我是个有力量有权势的人，那么我就是要把其他人给毁灭，因为我要扭转这个真实。而且就算我很有力量把许多人都给摧毁了，最终我还是会被这个真实给反噬给毁灭掉。因为就算我不相信重力是个客观真实的存在，但是当我从4000公尺高的飞机上跳下来，这个客观的现象也会给我非常非常真实的反馈。左派有同理心，这个初衷是良善的。你希望怎么被对待，那么你就怎么对待别人。这个道德初衷的本意是良善的，但是当这个同理心被极端人给误用的时候，开始扭曲事实，开始蔑视客观真实的时候，最终当我们活在一个世界是无法说出任何客观的事实的时候，要付出的成本最终还是我们自己。这就是为什么演化心理学会被视为眼中钉，因为它是这条毁灭道路上的一个障碍。毕竟现在要质疑物理或者化学这种基础科学还太早，这个世界毕竟还没有疯狂到这种程度。然而，虽然这个世界还没有疯狂到这个程度， 但是光是要摧毁演化心理学这件事情，就会开始对我们的生活造成的影响。我们可以从 gender paradox 这个理论被刻意弱化的情形来看出一点端倪。这个研究告诉我们，当这个世界更加的自由平等时，当男女可以更加依照自己的兴趣来发展自己的人生时，男女的差异反而变大了。然而在极左的世界里，在心灵白板论的世界里，他们是怎么去解释这个世界的？他告诉你，所有人出生都是一张白纸，而男人你之所以会有男子气概的气息，都是因为后天万恶父权强迫灌输给你的结果。然而，事实真的是这样吗？对我来说，硬是要我们忘却原有的天性以及天生优势，只是为了符合你心灵白板论的意识形态，这个才是被压抑与强迫的结果。我认同每个人都应该有自己的自主权来决定自己的人生。如果你的天生是比较偏女性化，你觉得打扮与行为更加的女性化会带你更好的人生，那这没有什么问题。然而，如果你的天性是偏向男子气概的阳刚气息呢？当你在决定你的未来的生活该如何前进的时候，你不希望可以更加了解自己的长处与短处吗？演化心理学就是这样的一个存在，它透过研究人类演进的过程以及环境会带给你的影响，让你可以更加的了解你自己的强项与弱项，以及你跟其他人有什么样不同的天性以及偏好。它本身并不是个阴然的学科，它不是个让你陷入愤世嫉俗的借口，也不是让你陷入基因决定论的憎恨。它其实是一个实然的学科，让你可以更加的了解自己，并且让你可以不再用天真的态度来面对这个世界。这是一件很重要的事情，因为很多时候人会陷入憎恨与毁灭，不是因为遇到眼前的挫折，而是因为过去的一生被灌输太多违反真实的谎言，并且在错误的信念下打造自己的人生，浪费一辈子的时间和资源在错误的人身上，直到真实真打到自己脸上了，才陷入一个万劫不复的境地。很高兴你看完这个影片，那么如果你想看我更多的内容的话，你可以到我另外一个 YouTube 频道，叫做 AB 的异想世界 Podcast。在那个频道，我每一周都有固定的直播，那么我会聊更多、更深入的男性自我提升的议题。那么还有另外一件事情要告诉你，最近我开始为我的 YouTube 影片做编曲，包含这个影片还有上个影片。那么我都会把这个影片的原声配乐放到我另外一个 YouTube 频道，叫做 AB 的异想世界音乐库。所以如果你有兴趣的话，可以去那个频道参观，我就把链接放在下面。好，那么今天这个影片就到这边结束了，我们就下个影片见啦，拜拜。